Every HTML element, no matter how big or small, can be thought of as a rectangular box made up of content, padding, borders, and margins. One of the most important concepts to understand is the CSS box model. The box model is the basis of CSS layout and positioning, and it dictates how elements are displayed and interact with each other. In this deep dive, we'll explore the main components that make up the CSS box model. Let's get started. The very basis of designing with CSS is understanding how the box model works. The box model applies to all HTML elements. It's essentially a box that wraps the elements. So first, we'll need to begin thinking of every HTML element as a rectangle or box. As you can see here, when a red border is applied to every element on the page, each element is made up of a rectangle or box. In order to understand this effectively, we need to know the two ways elements are naturally displayed. Elements are either displayed as block or inline elements. Block elements form a separate block that takes up the full width available based on the width of its parent element, with a new line before and after the element. Examples of block elements are divs, paragraphs, any heading tag, or list element. An inline element only takes up as much width as it needs. Inline elements do not force any new lines and stay in line with the rest of the document. Examples of inline elements are span tags, images, strong tags, and anchor elements. As I mentioned earlier, padding, borders, and margins are important components of the CSS box model and are the properties that essentially wrap the content area in the so-called box. Let's go ahead and discuss how padding, borders, and margins interact with each other to form a box, because it's important to understand. So the box in the box model is made up of 4 distinct parts that calculate its size. And visually, it's rather simple, as you can see in this image. The innermost area in core component is the content area, which is the area containing the element's actual content, such as text or images. The padding area surrounds the content area. It separates the content from the border area above. The border area of the box is the outermost part of the box. You can think of it as an outline to the box. Although borders are optional, different styles such as color and thickness can be applied to them. Finally, the margin area exists outside of the box. It's the space around an element that separates it from other elements. So just remember that with the margin property, we can create space around the elements. In the metrics pane of the Chrome DevTools, we can actually examine and edit each element's box model parameters. So here, we see the box model properties for the div element in our example. We can see the margins applied, the borders, padding, and the content area. Firefox, Safari, and IE also have similar tools for inspecting an element's box parameters. We'll switch over to a new HTML document containing an empty paragraph tag with a class of box. So let's start by adding a background color to this paragraph. In our CSS, we'll select our paragraph with a class of box, and we'll apply a background color. Back in the browser, when we refresh, nothing happens. We don't see the background color we just applied to our paragraph. Well, that's because it does not have any of the box model components and properties applied just yet. At the very least, let's go ahead and add the content area. So we'll just paste in some text inside of our paragraph. Back in the browser, when we refresh, we can now see the background color because the content area is no longer empty. Next, we'll define the padding area with the padding properties. The values for padding can be expressed as a length or a percentage, but negative values are not allowed. There are 2 different ways we can set the values for padding. The first way is by setting each property individually. So here we have 4 declarations for the top, right, bottom, and left sides of the paragraph. Back in our browser, we now see the padded space around the content area. To avoid having to create a declaration for each side, we can use the padding property, which is the shorthand property that sets the padding on all 4 sides in one declaration. If we use one value, the padding is applied on all 4 sides. So when we refresh, the paragraph has 30 pixels of padding on each side. If we use 2 values, the first one will apply to the top and bottom of the element, and the second value will be applied to the left and right sides. When we refresh, now the top and bottom sides have 30 pixels of padding, and the left and right sides have the 60 pixels we just specified. When using 3 values, the first value is applied to the top, the second is applied to the right and left sides, and the third value will be applied to the bottom side. When we refresh, there we see the 90 pixels applied only to the bottom. With 4 values, the first is applied to the top, the second value will be applied to the right, the third to the bottom, and the fourth value will be applied to the left side. So when using the shorthand property, just remember that the order is top, right, bottom, and left. We'll go ahead and keep the padding at 30 pixels on all 4 sides. Borders can be set using lengths or percentages. In order to see a border, we must define a border style, and there are 3 properties we can use to style borders. So let's go over these properties and their values. First, the border width property is used to set the width of the border. Border width can accept keywords or length units as its values, but negative or percentage values are not allowed. The default value for border width is medium. Other keyword values are thin and thick. Like the padding property, border width can have anywhere from 1 to 4 values specified that set a border width to each side of the box. When we refresh, we see that currently the value thick is being applied to all 4 sides of our paragraph. If we add the value 15 pixels, we'll save this out and refresh. Now we see that the top and bottom border widths are the thick value, while the left and right sides are 15 pixels wide. 4 values apply a border width to each side of the element. So here we have a value of thick for the top, 15 pixels for the right, a value of thin for the bottom, and 30 pixel border width for the left side. So go ahead and refresh to see what that looks like. In our CSS, we'll just keep it at 15 pixels on all 4 sides. The border style property sets the style of the element's borders. So let's go over some of the most common border style values. The value none is the default value, which, as you can see, specifies no border. A value of dotted applies a border that is dotted. A value of dash applies a dashed border. And a value of solid specifies a border that is solid. Border style can also have anywhere from 1 to 4 values. So like border width, you can specify a border style for each side in one declaration. So here we see that each side has a different border style. So we'll go ahead and set it to solid on all sides. Now, the border color property sets the color of the element's borders. The values can be any of the keyword or hexadecimal values. RGBA and HSLA are also accepted. The individual color properties are border top color, border right color, border bottom color, and border left color. Like the previous border properties, we can define them all in one declaration using the border color shorthand property. We can go ahead and remove these border color properties above. When we refresh the page, we can see the individual border colors that have been applied. We can define the border properties we just covered in one single line using the border shorthand property. So here we're specifying the border width, the border style, and the border color. We can go ahead and remove these border properties above because they've all been declared in the shorthand property. If no border color is specified, then it'll take on the text color. For example, let's remove this border color value here. And above it, we'll go ahead and add a color property and apply a value of tomato. When we refresh the page, notice how the border takes on the tomato text color value. Like the previous box properties we've discussed, we can define a margin for each side. For this example, I'm going to nest our paragraph inside of a div element. We'll give the new div a class of margin edge. In our style sheet, we'll select the margin edge div and apply some styles. So here I've applied a 3-pixel border that is dashed with the color red. We'll refresh the browser to see what this looks like. So this dashed red border will represent our margin edge. And we'll add margins to the paragraph element so we can see how it affects the space around it. The margin property accepts 3 types of values: lengths, percentages, and the keyword auto. Negative values are also allowed. So here we've added a margin property for each side of the paragraph. When we refresh the browser, we can see the margin space between the border edge and the margin edge. The margins push away from the paragraph. Again, like the padding and border properties, we can use a shorthand property for margins. So we'll write margin, then our values for top, right, bottom, and left. Now we can go ahead and remove all the margin properties above. When we apply a negative margin to the top or left sides, it pulls the element in that specified direction. When we refresh, we'll see how it moves 30 pixels up from its containing div and 30 pixels to the left. A negative margin applied to the bottom or right instead will pull any succeeding element into the main element. So for example, we'll add a bottom margin of negative 10%. Back in the browser, notice how it moved its containing div up 10%. But let's make this negative 30% so we can really see how this works. With the auto value, the browser calculates the margins. So if we add a value of auto for the left and right sides, we're allowing the browser to automatically calculate the margins. So the left and right margins will be set to equal. To see how this works, we'll need to add a width to our paragraph. Let's make it 50%. When we refresh, notice how this centers the paragraph in the available space of the parent div. The left and right margins are equal. Top and bottom margins will not have any effect on certain inline elements. In order to see the margins, we must change the element's display value to block or inline block, but we'll cover that in the next video. Now that we've covered the main properties of the CSS box model, we're ready to learn how width and height affect how the size of a box is calculated. That's coming up in the next video.